They called him the Ghost in hushed tones throughout MIT's Computational Sciences building. For 3 months, Dr. Nathan Reynolds had arrived each morning to find his impossible equations solved on his whiteboard. Complex mathematical proofs no one in his department could crack, completed in perfect, meticulous handwriting that wasn't his own. At first, he thought it was a prank. Then he thought it was a colleague. Now, he was installing a security camera. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. "This ends tonight," he muttered, adjusting the lens to capture the entire office. Whoever was accessing his private research after hours would finally be revealed. Dr. Nathan Reynolds was not accustomed to mysteries. As the head of quantum algorithm research at MIT, his world operated on logic, proven theorems, and predictable outcomes. His office, a corner space with windows overlooking the Charles River, was meticulously organized. Books alphabetized, pens arranged by color, whiteboards segmented into perfect grids. Even his coffee mug sat on a precisely measured coaster, exactly 4 inches from his keyboard, which is why the equations appearing on his boards each morning had driven him to the edge of scientific sanity. "I'm telling you, Sarah, it's not just someone solving the problems, they're improving them." He paced his office while his colleague, Dr. Sarah Williams, examined the latest mathematical marvel that had appeared overnight. "This isn't standard quantum notation," she said, tracing her finger along a sequence of symbols. "It's almost intuitive, like whoever wrote this sees connections we've been missing." Nathan ran a hand through his graying hair. 3 months of coming in every morning to find my security protocols bypassed and my work enhanced. He spat the last word. Sarah stepped back from the board. "Have you considered that maybe you should be grateful? This solution to the quantum decoherence problem, we've been stuck on this for years." "Grateful?" Nathan's voice rose. "For someone breaking into my office? For someone touching my work without permission? For someone making me question whether I've been sleepwalking and solving problems I can't solve awake?" He shook his head. "The camera goes up tonight." The truth was, Nathan Reynolds had built his reputation on being the brightest mind in any room. 5 published books, 17 breakthrough papers, and a waiting list of PhD candidates hoping to study under him. But these morning revelations were proving what he'd secretly feared for years. Perhaps he wasn't as brilliant as everyone thought. As evening fell across Cambridge, Nathan finished mounting the small camera in the upper corner of his office. He deliberately left an unsolved problem on the centerboard, a particularly thorny quantum computation challenge that had stumped his entire department for months. A trap for his mysterious visitor. "Let's see who you are," he whispered to the empty room before locking his door. Across campus, in the basement of the Computational Sciences building, Michael Chen methodically pushed his cleaning cart down the dimly lit hallway. 28 years old, with dark hair that fell across his eyes and a permanent stoop to his shoulders, Michael moved with the predictable rhythm of someone who found comfort in routine. Same cart, same corridors, same precise movements each night. The building was quiet at 11:30 p.m. Michael preferred it this way. Daytime was too bright, too loud, too full of people who stared when he rocked back and forth, or when his hands fluttered at his sides. Night was gentle. Night didn't judge. As he approached Dr. Reynolds' office, Michael paused. This wasn't on his official cleaning route. The research offices were supposed to be handled by the day staff, but 3 months ago, Michael had accidentally used his master key to enter when he noticed the light had been left on. He'd intended only to turn it off, to restore the perfect darkness of his nighttime domain. But then he'd seen the equations. Michael's fingers twitched at the memory. Numbers and symbols that sang to him, that made patterns in his mind more vivid than anything he'd ever experienced. He'd stood frozen before the whiteboard that night, unable to look away from the mathematical melody that only he could hear. Without thinking, he'd picked up a marker and begun to write. Now, after 3 months of secret visits, it had become the most important part of his routine. Clean the bathrooms, mop the lecture halls, empty the trash bins, and then visit Dr. Reynolds' office and complete the beautiful broken equations that waited for him. Michael slipped his key into the lock and entered quietly. He didn't turn on the main lights. The soft glow from the hallway was enough. He set his cart by the door and approached the board, unaware of the camera recording his every move. The equation that greeted him tonight was different, more complex, more challenging. Michael tilted his head, his body beginning to rock gently as the numbers flowed through his consciousness. His eyes, normally avoidant and darting, now focused with laser intensity on the mathematical problem before him. He picked up a blue marker, never red, red was too angry, and began to write. Michael didn't think about the mathematics the way Dr. Reynolds and his colleagues did. He didn't see abstract variables or theoretical constructs. He saw music, he saw architecture. Each number had a color, each function a texture. Quantum superposition wasn't a scientific concept, it was a dance of particles that Michael could visualize in perfect detail. For 2 hours, he worked without pause, his hand moving across the board as if guided by something beyond himself. When he finally stepped back, he'd not only solved the problem, he'd reimagined it, where Reynolds had been approaching the quantum computation challenge from conventional angles. Michael had created a shortcut through mathematical dimensions the professor had never considered. With a final glance at his work, Michael returned the marker to its precise location, retrieved his cart, and slipped out as quietly as he'd entered, unaware that his secret had just been captured on camera. The morning sun cast long shadows through the blinds of Nathan's office as he replayed the security footage for the 3rd time. He'd arrived early, heart racing with anticipation, only to find his whiteboard transformed once again. The equation he'd left supposedly unsolvable had been completely reimagined with an elegant solution that made his jaw drop. But it wasn't a rival professor or an ambitious graduate student who had done this. "A janitor," Nathan whispered, watching the footage again. "A janitor solved this." On the screen, Michael Chen moved with strange grace, his body rocking as he wrote line after line of advanced mathematics without hesitation, without reference, materials, without any apparent education that would explain such brilliance. "Nathan, did you catch your ghost?" Sarah Williams appeared in the doorway, coffee in hand. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Wordlessly, Nathan motioned her over to view the footage. They watched together in silence as Michael worked, his movements almost trance-like. "My God," Sarah finally said. "Who is he?" "His name badge says Michael Chen. Works nights, building maintenance staff." Nathan's voice was hollow with disbelief. "Sarah, look at how he's moving, the rocking, the hand gestures. I think he might be autistic," she finished. "High functioning, clearly. But how is this possible? This solution?" She gestured to the whiteboard. "This is beyond PhD level work. This is revolutionary." Nathan stood abruptly. "I need to speak with him." "Nathan, wait." Sarah caught his arm. "Think about this. He's been coming in secretly at night. He clearly doesn't want to be discovered. He's been breaking into my office for months." "Has he?" "He's janitorial staff. He has keys, and he hasn't damaged anything or stolen anything. He's been helping you." Nathan paced the length of his office, Everything in his world operated according to clear hierarchies and established credentials. Breakthroughs came from brilliant minds with advanced degrees and years of specialized study, not from night shift janitors who'd never set foot in a quantum physics classroom. "I need to know how he's doing this," Nathan said firmly. "This isn't just curiosity, Sarah. Look at this solution. If he truly understands what he's written, if this isn't some savant trick or fluke, then he's just solved a problem that could advance quantum computing by years." Sarah studied her colleague carefully. "What are you going to do?" Nathan checked his watch. "Building maintenance staff usually end their shift at 6 a.m. If we hurry, we might catch him." Michael was exhausted, but satisfied as he emptied the last trash bin into his cart. The night's cleaning tasks were complete, and best of all, he'd spent time with the beautiful equation in Dr. Reynolds' office. His mind still hummed with the patterns and connections he'd discovered there. As he wheeled his cart toward the storage closet, Michael kept his eyes on the floor, a habit developed over years of avoiding uncomfortable eye contact. Which is why he didn't notice the two professors waiting for him until he nearly collided with them. "Michael Chen." The man's voice was sharp, authoritative. Michael took a step backward, his hands immediately beginning to flutter at his sides. His eyes darted around, looking anywhere but at the faces in front of him. "Yes?" he managed, his voice soft and uncertain. "I'm Dr. Nathan Reynolds. This is my colleague, Dr. Williams. We'd like to speak with you about your visits to my office." Michael's world instantly collapsed into panic. The comfortable routine of his nights shattered with those few words. He'd been discovered. He'd done something wrong. His rocking intensified. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I didn't damage anything. The numbers were wrong. They needed fixing." Nathan exchanged a glance with Sarah, who stepped forward with a gentler approach. "Michael, we're not angry," she said softly. "We're actually quite impressed. Could you tell us where you learned to do that kind of mathematics?" Michael's eyes finally lifted, not to their faces, but to a point just beyond Sarah's shoulder. "The numbers talk to me," he said simply. "They always have, since I was little." "Talk to you?" Nathan couldn't keep the skepticism from his voice. "You mean you visualize them?" Michael's hands twirled in small, anxious circles. "They have colors and textures, and when they're arranged wrong, it's like a song that's out of tune. I just fix them so they sound right again." Sarah pulled out her phone and displayed the image of a complex equation. "Michael, can you tell me what you see when you look at this?" Michael glanced at the screen, and his whole demeanor changed. The anxiety seemed to fall away as he focused on the mathematics. "It's blue and silver, with edges that need smoothing. The left side is too heavy, it wants to fall. If you move this part here," his finger traced a pattern on the screen, "it balances better." Nathan stepped closer. "Could you show me what you mean?" Udi, for the next 10 minutes, in the quiet hallway of MIT's Computational Sciences building, as the morning sun began to stream through distant windows, Michael Chen explained quantum mathematics in a language of colors, shapes, and music. He spoke not of theoretical principles, but of how the numbers felt, how they wanted to move, how they sang when properly aligned. Neither professor fully understood his descriptions, but they understood enough to know they were in the presence of something extraordinary. "Michael," Nathan said finally, "would you be willing to come to my office sometime during the day, officially? I'd like to understand more about how you see these problems." The request sent an immediate wave of anxiety through Michael. Daytime meant people, noise, stares, confusion. I'm not good with people," he admitted. "Night is better, quieter." "What if we arranged a special time?" Sarah suggested. "Early evening when the building is nearly empty, just the three of us?" Michael rocked gently, considering. His sister Emma had always encouraged him to share his special way of seeing numbers, but fear had always held him back. Yet here were two professors, real professors from MIT, who had seen what he could do and weren't mocking him or dismissing him. "Maybe," he said finally, "I could try." "Excellent," Nathan said, trying to contain his excitement. "Tomorrow evening, 6 o'clock?" Michael nodded once, then quickly pushed his cart past them toward the storage room, his mind already calculating how this disruption would affect his carefully structured routine. Behind him, Nathan turned to Sarah with wide eyes. "Did you see what he did with that equation? He reconfigured a tensorial transformation without any formal training. How is that possible?" "I don't know," Sarah admitted. "But I think we've just found the most remarkable mathematical mind of our generation, cleaning our floors." Emma Chen was stirring a pot of morning congee when her brother shuffled into their small apartment. One look at his agitated movements told her something had disrupted his routine. "Michael, what happened?" She set down her spoon, giving him her full attention. Michael paced the small kitchen, his hands fluttering more intensely than usual. "They know. The professors. They saw me on a camera." Emma guided her brother to a chair, placing a cup of tea in front of him, the routine that always calmed him after work. "Slow down. What professors? What camera?" Between sips of tea, Michael explained about Dr. Reynolds' office, the equations he'd been solving, and the morning's confrontation. Emma listened without interruption, years of experience, having taught her that Michael needed to complete his thoughts without being derailed. When he finished, she sat back in surprise. "So, you've been sneaking into a professor's office for months to solve his quantum physics problems?" Michael nodded, eyes on his tea. "The equations looked wrong. I had to fix them." Emma suppressed a smile. Her brother had been fixing mathematical equations since he was 5 years old, starting with her elementary school homework and progressing to advanced textbooks she'd bring home from the library, just to keep his mind engaged. His autism had made traditional education impossible. The sensory overload of classrooms, the social expectations, the rigid teaching methods that couldn't accommodate his unique way of processing information. But his mathematical genius had never been in doubt, at least not to her. The problem had always been getting others to see past his differences to the brilliant mind beneath. "And now they want to meet with you officially?" she asked. "Tomorrow evening, in his office." Michael's fingers tapped an anxious rhythm on the table. "What if it's a trick? What if they're angry? What if they fire me?" Emma reached across the table and gently stilled his hands. "Michael, listen to me. If these professors wanted to fire you, they would have done it this morning. They're interested in your mind, in your special way of seeing mathematics. But I don't have degrees. I don't have papers. I'm just a janitor." Emma squeezed his hands. "You're my brilliant brother who sees the world in ways no one else can. Maybe it's time the world got a glimpse of how you see it." Michael looked uncertain, but he nodded slowly. "Will you come with me? Wait outside, maybe?" "Of course," Emma promised. "I'll be right outside the whole time." As his sister returned to the stove, Michael stared into his tea, watching the patterns of light refract through the liquid. He'd spent his entire life hiding his abilities, staying invisible, keeping his head down. The thought of stepping into the light terrified him. But for the first time, someone besides Emma had seen what he could do, and they hadn't turned away. The next evening, Nathan's office was transformed. He'd cleared away the clutter, dimmed the overhead, lights that he suspected might bother Michael, and prepared 3 whiteboards with different unsolved problems from his research. "Do you think he'll actually come?" Sarah asked, arranging chairs in a loose semicircle, close enough for conversation, but not so close as to make Michael uncomfortable. I hope so, Nathan replied, checking his watch for the 5th time. I've been reviewing the footage again. The way he approaches these problems, it's unlike anything I've ever seen. At precisely 6 o'clock, there was a soft knock at the door. Nathan opened it to find Michael standing rigidly in the hallway, his sister Emma beside him. "Hi, I'm Emma Chen," she said, extending a hand while Michael stared at the floor. "Michael asked me to come with him. I'll wait outside if that's okay." "Of course," Nathan assured her, shaking her hand. "We're just grateful," Michael agreed, "to meet with us." Michael entered cautiously, his eyes immediately drawn to the whiteboards. Something in his posture changed as he scanned the equations. The anxiety seemed to diminish, replaced by focused attention. "Thank you for coming, Michael," Sarah said gently. "We've prepared some problems we thought might interest you. Would you like to look at them?" Michael nodded, already moving toward the first board. For the next hour, Nathan and Sarah watched in amazement as Michael worked through problems that had stumped their entire department. He rarely spoke as he wrote, but when he did, it was in that same unusual language of colors, textures, and sounds. He described quantum entanglement as threads of light connecting mirrors, and complex probability fields as raindrops falling through layers of different colored glass. Nathan took careful notes, occasionally asking questions that Michael answered in his own unique way. It became clear that while Michael lacked the formal vocabulary of quantum physics, his intuitive understanding of the concepts was profound, perhaps deeper than anyone Nathan had ever met. "Michael," Nathan said as they approached the final equation, "can I ask how long you've been able to do this?" Michael's hand paused on the board. "Always," he said quietly. "But people didn't like it when I showed them. In school, they said I was cheating. In college," he stopped. "You went to college?" Sarah asked gently. Michael nodded, his gaze still on the equation. "For 3 weeks, Boston Community College. Basic math class. The lights were too bright, too many people talking at once. The professor didn't believe I could solve the problems without writing the steps. He thought I was disturbing the class when I rocked, so I left." The simple statement hung in the air, a quiet testament to a system that had failed to accommodate a brilliant mind that processed the world differently. "And you've been working as a janitor since then?" Nathan asked. 4 years here. Before, that grocery store, warehouse, parking garage. Night shifts are better, quieter." Nathan and Sarah exchanged glances, a wordless communication passing between them. Here was a mathematical genius who had been invisible to the academic world, pushing mops and emptying trash while his mind solved problems that stumped MIT's brightest. "Michael," Nathan said carefully, "would you be interested in working with us? Not as a janitor, but as a research collaborator?" Michael's hand froze on the whiteboard. He turned slowly, his eyes focusing somewhere near Nathan's shoulder. "Why?" The simple question caught Nathan off guard. "Because your mind, your way of seeing these problems, it's extraordinary. You've solved in minutes what our team hasn't been able to solve in months." Michael's rocking intensified slightly. "But I don't have papers. I don't have degrees." "There are other paths," Sarah interjected gently. "Special arrangements for exceptional cases. It wouldn't be conventional, but neither is your gift." Michael stood silent, processing. Finally, he asked, "Could I still work at night sometimes, when it's quiet?" "We could arrange that," Nathan assured him. "We'd adjust to what works best for you." Michael nodded once, definitively. "I'll think about it," he said, capping the marker and placing it precisely in the tray. As he left the office to rejoin his waiting sister, Nathan turned to Sarah with a mixture of awe and determination on his face. "We just witnessed something remarkable," he said quietly. "And I'm not letting that mind slip away again." Outside in the hallway, Emma looked up expectantly as Michael emerged from the office. "How did it go?" Michael was quiet for a moment, then said simply, "They want me to solve equations for them, not as a janitor, as a collaborator." Emma couldn't contain her smile. "Michael, that's amazing. What did you tell them?" "That I'd think about it." He began walking toward the exit, his pace quicker than usual. "It's different, Emma. It would change everything." Emma caught up to him, linking her arm through his, the one form of touch he had always accepted comfortably. "Sometimes different can be good," she said softly. "Sometimes different can be exactly what we need." As they stepped out into the cool evening air, MIT's historic buildings loomed against the twilight sky. For years, Michael had only entered those buildings in darkness, invisible to the brilliant minds inside. Now, for the first time, those minds had seen him, really seen him, and recognized something they hadn't expected. That genius doesn't always arrive in familiar packages with polished credentials. Sometimes it arrives with a mop and a quiet voice that speaks of numbers in colors. And sometimes it just needs someone to watch the security footage to discover a mind that might change everything. The MIT Quantum Computing Research Lab buzzed with whispers. For the past 2 weeks, faculty members had caught glimpses of a strange figure being ushered through hallways typically reserved for distinguished academics. He didn't carry himself like a visiting professor. His clothes were simple, faded. Jeans, plain button-ups that didn't quite match, sneakers worn at the edges. Most peculiar was the way he moved, eyes down, shoulders hunched, hands occasionally fluttering at his sides. Yet Dr. Nathan Reynolds, whose reputation for intellectual elitism was nearly as renowned as his quantum algorithms, treated this man with a deference usually reserved for Nobel laureates. "Who is he?" whispered a postdoctoral fellow to her colleague as they observed Nathan guiding the visitor toward his private research space. "Some kind of consultant, I heard. Reynolds discovered him solving equations after hours. Is he from DARPA, Princeton? Maintenance department, actually." Inside Nathan's research lab, Michael Chen stood before a wall of advanced equations, utterly transformed from the anxious man who navigated the hallway moments before. His body still rocked gently, but his eyes scanned the mathematics with intense focus, seeing patterns and connections invisible to everyone else. "What do you think, Michael?" Nathan asked, careful to keep his voice soft, having learned that loud noises could disrupt Michael's concentration. Michael tilted his head, studying the quantum problem that had consumed Nathan's team for months. "It's unbalanced," he said simply, "like a table with 3 legs." Dr. Sarah Williams, who had been instrumental in creating this unusual collaboration, smiled. Over the past 2 weeks, she'd developed a translator's role, helping convert Michael's intuitive, sensory descriptions into the formal language of academic physics. "Can you show us the 4th leg?" she prompted. Michael picked up a marker, his movements suddenly precise. Whereas moments before his body had seemed unsure of its place in the world, now his hand moved with absolute certainty across the board. The equations flowed, transformed, connected in ways that made Nathan catch his breath. "That's remarkable," Nathan murmured as Michael completed a sequence that effectively resolved their quantum decoherence problem. Most physicists would approach this by attempting to stabilize the wave function collapse, but you've actually found a way to utilize the instability itself. Michael capped the marker carefully, placing it exactly where he'd found it. "The numbers wanted to dance, not stand still," he explained, as if it were obvious. Sarah jotted down notes, adding another entry to her growing lexicon of Michael speak. Dancing numbers meant dynamic systems, colors referred to energy states, heaviness indicated mathematical density. Nathan checked his watch. "The department. Meeting starts in 15 minutes. Michael, would you be comfortable joining? There are some colleagues I'd like you to meet." Immediate anxiety flickered across Michael's face. 2 weeks into this new arrangement, he'd grown somewhat comfortable in Nathan's private lab with just Nathan and Sarah present. But larger gatherings remained overwhelming. "Too many people," he said quietly. "Too many voices overlapping." Nathan nodded, hiding his disappointment. "Of course. Perhaps another time." "I could stay here," Michael suggested. "Work on the blue problem." He pointed to another whiteboard where a different quantum computation challenge awaited. "That would be wonderful," Sarah assured him. "We'll be back in about an hour." As Nathan and Sarah left for the meeting, Michael approached the new problem with relief. Numbers didn't judge. Numbers didn't stare when his hands fluttered or when he needed to rock to stay calm. Numbers simply existed, waiting for him to hear their music and help them find their proper place. The faculty lounge fell silent as Nathan and Sarah entered. 8 professors and 3 department heads turned expectantly toward them. "Well," prompted Dr. James Anderson, chair of quantum computing, "is your mysterious mathematician joining us? We're all rather eager to meet the night janitor, who's apparently revolutionizing our field." Nathan winced at Anderson's tone. "Michael is more comfortable working individually at the moment. His cognitive processes require specific environments." "His cognitive processes?" echoed Professor Diana Mercer, arching an eyebrow. "Nathan, while we all appreciate your compassionate project, the department has concerns. You've allocated significant resources to an individual with no formal training or credentials." "His results speak for themselves," Sarah interjected, opening her laptop and projecting a series of equations onto the wall screen. "This is Michael's solution to the quantum entanglement preservation problem we've been stuck on since last year's conference in Zurich." The room fell silent as the professors studied the mathematics. Even the most skeptical among them couldn't deny the elegance of the solution. "This is unconventional," Professor Mercer admitted. "Revolutionary," corrected Nathan. "And there's more. Michael has developed an entirely new approach to quantum bit stability that could advance our computing models by years." Dr. Anderson leaned forward. "Assuming these results can be replicated and verified, what exactly are you proposing, Nathan?" "A special research position for Michael, appropriate accommodations for his autism, and co-authorship on papers derived from his insights." The room erupted in objections. "Co-authorship for someone without even a bachelor's degree? What precedent does this set for our academic standards? How would this be received by the scientific community?" Nathan raised his hand for silence. "James, 15 years ago, you told me that true scientific innovation rarely comes from within established systems. You said we should be looking for minds that see what we cannot. Well, I've found one. And yes, he rocks when he's thinking and communicates through colors and textures rather than formal terminology, but he's solving problems in minutes that our entire department hasn't resolved in months." The room quieted. Anderson's own words reflected back at him. "How would this work practically?" asked a younger professor from the back. "Our protocols, our methodologies, they're not designed for neurodivergent contributors?" Sarah finished. "Then perhaps it's time we adapted our protocols rather than expecting minds like Michael's to adapt to us." Anderson sighed, removing his glasses to polish them thoughtfully. "Prepare a formal proposal. Document his contributions meticulously. If his work is as groundbreaking as you claim, we'll create a position." But Nathan, he fixed him with a stern gaze. "This isn't just about mathematics. This is a person. Are you prepared to adapt your own working style to accommodate him long-term? Your impatience with what you consider intellectual inadequacy is well known." Nathan felt the weight of scrutiny from his colleagues. The irony wasn't lost on him. The professor once voted most likely to reduce a student to tears was now advocating for special accommodations for a janitor. "I'm learning," he said simply. "Michael is teaching me." Emma Chen sat on a bench outside the Computational Sciences building, watching students stream past with their backpacks and laptops. 2 months ago, she could never have imagined her brother entering these hallowed halls as anything other than the invisible man who emptied trash bins after everyone else had gone home. Now, as she waited for Michael to finish his session with Dr. Reynolds, she allowed herself a cautious sense of hope. Michael was still working nights as a janitor, the routine too important to his sense of stability to abandon completely. But 3 evenings a week, he transformed from custodian to mathematician. Her phone buzzed with a text from Michael. "Finished. Meeting tomorrow cancelled." Emma frowned, typing back, "Everything okay?" A moment later, Michael emerged from the building, his gait stiffer than usual, a sign of heightened anxiety. Emma immediately stood, reading his body language with the fluency of someone who had spent a lifetime as his interpreter to the world. "What happened?" she asked gently as they fell into step together. "Dr. Reynolds wants me to present my work," Michael said, his voice tight. "To a room full of professors next week. He says it's important for the special position." Emma felt a mixture of elation and concern. A formal presentation was a monumental opportunity and an enormous challenge for someone with Michael's sensory processing issues. "What did you tell him?" "That I need to think about it." Michael's pace quickened. There would be questions, eyes watching, people judging. They reached the bus stop in silence, both lost in thought. As they boarded the bus that would take them back to their small apartment in East Cambridge, Emma carefully considered her words. "Remember when you were 10 and you solved that math problem on the library computer, the one the university students had been working on?" Michael nodded, his eyes fixed on the passing scenery. "Do you remember what you told me afterward, when I asked how you did it?" A ghost of a smile touched Michael's lips. "I said the numbers were singing, and I just wrote down their song." "Your mind hears music that most people will never understand," Emma said quietly. "But now, you have a chance to let them listen, even if just for a moment." Michael continued staring out the window, but his rocking slowed slightly as he processed her words. "I would need note cards," he said finally, "and to practice exactly what to say. And the lights would need to be dimmed." Emma smiled, hearing in his practical considerations a tentative yes. Dr. Reynolds and Dr. Williams would help with all that. They've been good advocates so far, haven't they? Michael nodded. They listen differently now, not just to what I say, but to how I need to say it. As the bus lurched to their stop, Emma squeezed her brother's hand gently. "The world has spent your whole life trying to make you fit into its boxes, Michael. Maybe it's time the world adapted to you for a change." The following week, Nathan paced nervously outside the department's main conference room. Inside, faculty members and several university administrators had gathered for what he had carefully framed as a research presentation, deliberately downplaying that the presenter was a former night janitor with no formal education beyond high school. Sarah approached, guiding Michael, who was dressed in what was clearly a new button-up shirt, still creased from its packaging. They had spent days preparing, creating a carefully structured presentation that played to Michael's strengths while accommodating his needs. The lights in the room had been dimmed, a clear script had been developed, potential questions had been rehearsed. "Ready?" Sarah asked gently. Michael's hands fluttered briefly at his sides, then steadied. "The numbers are ready," he said. "I'm just their messenger." They entered the conference room together. Nathan had arranged the seating to create a clear path to the presentation area, minimizing the feeling of being surrounded. Every detail had been considered to reduce Michael's anxiety. As Michael took his position before the main screen, the room Quieted, Dr. Anderson, seated in the front row, nodded encouragingly. "Good afternoon," Michael began, his voice soft but audible in the hushed room. "My name is Michael Chen. I see mathematics differently than most people." For the next 20 minutes, Michael presented his approach to quantum decoherence and bit stability. At first, he kept his eyes fixed on his notes, his body rocking gently, but as he delved deeper into the mathematics, a transformation occurred. His stuttering faded. His movements became more purposeful. When he reached the whiteboards to demonstrate his solutions, he began to speak in his natural language of colors and textures and music. Some professors exchanged confused glances. Others leaned forward, captivated. Dr. Anderson's eyes never left the equations forming on the board. When Michael finished, there was a moment of profound silence. Then Dr. Anderson stood. "Mr. Chen," he said formally, "could you elaborate on your approach to the quantum entanglement preservation, particularly the second transformation?" Michael tilted his head, considering. "It's like when you have two dancers spinning. Traditional approaches try to make them spin at the same rate to stay connected, but I let them spin at their natural rates and instead change how they're connected. The connection becomes flexible, adaptive." Anderson nodded slowly, turning to Nathan with raised eyebrows. Nathan held his breath, recognizing the evaluative look. "Well, Dr. Reynolds," Anderson said finally, "it seems your unconventional candidate may indeed have something extraordinary to offer our department." He turned back to Michael. "Mr. Chen, would you be amenable to continuing this work in a more formal capacity?" Michael looked to Emma, who had been permitted to sit quietly in the back of the room as moral support. She gave him an encouraging nod. "Yes," Michael said simply, "as long as I can still work in quiet spaces and use colors to explain when the regular words don't fit." "I think we can accommodate that," Anderson replied with unexpected warmth. "Science progresses when we look beyond conventional frameworks, both in mathematics and in whom we recognize as mathematicians." 3 months after his first official presentation, Michael Chen had a small office on the 3rd floor of the Computational Sciences building, a quiet space with dimmable lights, minimal decorations and walls covered in whiteboards. The room had been carefully designed to minimize sensory overload while maximizing mathematical creativity. Though he still worked partial night shifts as a janitor, the routine too comforting to abandon completely, Michael now spent most of his time translating his unique vision of quantum mathematics into frameworks that other scientists could build upon. Nathan knocked gently on Michael's open door, careful not to startle him. "Michael, we've just received word from the Quantum Computation Journal. They've accepted our paper, your paper really, for publication in next month's issue." Michael looked up from the equation he was working on, his expression thoughtful rather than excited. "Will people understand it?" "Thanks to Sarah's work as translator, yes. Your insights, presented in conventional mathematical language with full credit to your unconventional methods." Nathan handed him the acceptance email. "You're about to become published, Michael." Michael studied the email, tracing his name printed beneath Nathan's on the author line. Chen M. 2 simple syllables that represented a seismic shift in his life. "There's something else," Nathan continued carefully. "The International Conference on Quantum Computing has invited us to present this work in Chicago next month. It would mean traveling, staying in a hotel, speaking to a large audience. I understand if that's too overwhelming." Michael set down the paper, his hands beginning their familiar flutter of anxiety. "How many people?" "About 300, but we could request specific accommodations. A smaller session, scheduled timing so you could prepare precisely sensory considerations." Michael was silent for a long moment, his body rocking gently as he processed. "I would need Emma to come. and specific preparations, and an escape route if it becomes too much. Nathan nodded, having anticipated these requirements. All arrangements would be made with your needs as the priority. You wouldn't have to attend any social functions or sit through other presentations if you didn't want to. Why is it important to go in person? Why not just send the paper? Nathan considered his answer carefully. Because scientific advancement isn't just about publishing equations, Michael. It's about changing how people think. And sometimes, the most powerful way to change thinking is to show them something, someone, they never expected. Michael turned back to his whiteboard, adding a final symbol to his current equation before capping his marker with precise movements. "I'll think about it," he said, his standard response when processing a difficult decision. Nathan nodded, recognizing the phrase not as a dismissal, but as Michael's genuine need for time. As he turned to leave, Michael spoke again. "Dr. Reynolds, when we publish, will people know that I was a janitor? That I don't have degrees?" The question carried an undertone of vulnerability that caught Nathan off guard. "The paper includes your current position as research associate in quantum mathematics. Your educational background isn't relevant to the validity of your work. But people will ask. They always do." Nathan turned back fully. "Yes, they probably. It will. Does that concern you?" Michael was quiet for a moment. "I used to think being the invisible person was safer. No one questioned the man who emptied their trash. But the numbers, they never wanted to be invisible. And now," Nathan prompted gently, "now I think maybe I don't either." Michael's hands stilled. "We can go to Chicago. The numbers should be heard, even if the room is too bright and too full of people." Janitor to Sunder, the Chicago Quantum Computing Conference was held in a gleaming modern venue with soaring glass walls and multiple presentation halls. For Michael, it was an overwhelming assault of sensations. Too many voices echoing off hard surfaces, too many people moving in unpredictable patterns, too many unknowns. He sat in a quiet side room that Nathan had arranged as his retreat space, Emma beside him, reviewing their carefully constructed schedule for the third time. "You present at exactly 2:15 in Hall C," she reminded him. "We'll arrive at 2 Saturn 2. Set up. Dr. Reynolds will introduce you for exactly 3 minutes. Then you'll have 20 minutes for your presentation. No one will interrupt until the designated question period." Michael nodded, focusing on the predictability of the timeline to anchor himself amid the chaos beyond the door. He wore noise-canceling earbuds that reduced the conference's roar to a manageable hum. A gentle knock preceded Sarah's entrance. "It's time to head toward Hall C," she said with an encouraging smile. "How are you feeling, Michael?" "Loud," he answered honestly, "but ready." Together, the small group navigated the conference center, Sarah and Nathan creating a buffer between Michael and the bustling crowds. Emma remained close at his side, a constant presence of reassurance. Hall C was already filling as they arrived. Michael froze momentarily at the sight of so many people, but Nathan guided him to the presentation area, which had been set up exactly as they had requested, podium off to the side giving clear access. To the whiteboards, lights dimmed slightly. Laser pointer ready for Michael to indicate sections without having to gesticulate. "Remember," Sarah said quietly, "just like we practiced. The mathematics is what matters, and there, you're the expert." At precisely 2:15, Nathan stepped to the podium. "Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Nathan Reynolds from MIT's Quantum Computing Research Lab. Today, I have the honor of introducing a remarkable mathematical mind whose unconventional approach to quantum bit stability has produced the breakthrough detailed in our recent publication." He paused, scanning the attentive faces. "Mr. Michael Chen doesn't come to us through traditional academic channels. His insights arise from a unique cognitive framework that allows him to perceive mathematical patterns intuitively, often visualizing solutions that elude conventional approaches. In the audience, murmurs began as people leaned in, intrigued by this unusual introduction. I invite you to listen not just to the mathematics, but to a new way of conceptualizing problems that many of us have approached through increasingly narrow methodological frameworks. Mr. Chen. Michael stepped forward, his eyes initially downcast. The room fell silent. 300 of the world's top quantum researchers watching with curiosity and, from some, skepticism. "Hello," Michael began softly, his voice amplified by the microphone. "I see mathematics as colors and textures and music. The problems you've been trying to solve with quantum bits have been discordant, like instruments playing in different keys." He moved to the whiteboard and picked up a marker. As he began to write, transforming complex quantum stability issues into his unique mathematical framework, something shifted in the room. The initial curiosity evolved into focused attention. As the elegance of his approach became apparent, Michael fell into the comfort of numbers, his body's rocking becoming less a sign of anxiety and more a rhythm to match the mathematics flowing through his mind. He spoke not of theoretical quantum constructs, but of balance and harmony and patterns that wanted to align if only given the proper structure. By the time he completed his presentation, the skepticism had largely vanished from the audience. In its place was something rarer in academic conferences: wonder. The question period began with a silver-haired professor from Stanford. "Mr. Chen, your approach essentially inverts traditional stabilization methods. What led you to consider this reverse perspective?" Michael considered the question. "The equations were backward," he said simply. "Everyone was trying to force stability onto naturally unstable systems. I just let them be unstable in predictable ways." Another question came from a quantum researcher from Germany. "This visualization method you describe, seeing mathematics as colors and textures, could you elaborate? Some of us might benefit from understanding your cognitive process." Michael looked to Sarah, who nodded encouragingly. This was a question they had prepared for. "When I see equations," Michael explained, "the variables have colors, constants have textures, operations create movements and sounds. When they're wrong, they're painful to look at. When they're right, they sing." He paused. "I don't know if other people can learn to see this way, but maybe they can learn to listen for when the mathematics is trying to tell them something new." And boom, the session extended well beyond its allotted time. The audience captivated not just by the breakthrough mathematics, but by the unusual mind that had conceived it. When it finally concluded, several prominent researchers approached asking for follow-up conversations, proposing collaborations, offering resources. Emma watched from the side of the hall, tears in her eyes. For 28 years, her brother had been dismissed, overlooked, relegated to society's margins. Now, some of the world's most brilliant minds were clustering around him, eager to understand how he saw the universe. As the crowd finally dispersed, Nathan made his way back to Michael, who was visibly exhausted but calm. "You did it," Nathan said simply. Michael nodded once. "The numbers did it. I just helped them be heard." Dati? The headline in MIT's technology review read, "Unconventional Genius: How an Autistic Janitor is Transforming Quantum Computing." The article detailed Michael's unlikely journey from night shift custodian to groundbreaking mathematician, emphasizing not just his contributions to the field, but the institutional adaptations that had made his inclusion possible. Similar stories appeared in scientific journals and mainstream publications alike. Some focused on the mathematics, others on the human interest angle of an undiscovered genius hiding in plain sight. A few delved deeper, questioning the academic structures that might be excluding other brilliant minds that processed information differently. In their small apartment, Emma set aside the latest article and looked at her brother, who was carefully arranging a row of colored markers on their kitchen table. "They're calling you a genius," she said softly. Michael continued his precise alignment of the markers. "I'm just me, the same me who was invisible when I pushed a mop. Does it bother you, all this attention?" Michael considered the question with his characteristic thoroughness. "Sometimes," he admitted, "the noise of it, the unpredictability, but also—" He looked up, making brief eye contact. "It means the numbers are being heard, and maybe other people who see the world differently will be heard too." Emma reached across the table, not touching him, but placing her hand within reach. After a moment, Michael's fingers brushed against hers, his version of connection. "Dr. Reynolds called," she said. "The university wants to establish a specialized research track for neurodivergent mathematicians and scientists. They want you to help design it." Michael's hands stilled on his markers. "They want me to help change how things are done. They recognize that traditional academic structures might be filtering out important perspectives. Your success has made them reconsider their approaches." Michael absorbed this, rocking gently as he processed. "The world shouldn't only hear from minds that think in straight lines and speak in perfect sentences," he said finally. "No," Emma agreed, "it shouldn't." Outside their window, the lights of Cambridge twinkled in the gathering dusk. Somewhere across the city, in a lab at MIT, equations that Michael had helped solve were advancing quantum computing in ways that would reshape technology's future. But here, in this quiet kitchen, a more profound transformation was occurring, the recognition that brilliance comes in many forms, and sometimes the most revolutionary insights come from those society has taught itself not to see. "I think," Michael said slowly, "I'm ready to help build something new, something that makes room for different kinds of minds." Emma smiled, watching her brother return to aligning his markers with mathematical precision. The invisible man was invisible no more, and the world of science would never be quite the same. 5 years had passed since a security camera captured Michael Chen solving complex equations in Dr. Nathan Reynolds' office. What had begun as an anomaly, an autistic janitor with an extraordinary mathematical gift, had evolved into something transformative, not just for quantum computing, but for the entire structure of scientific inclusion at MIT and beyond. Today, Neurodiversity and Scientific Excellence Center occupied a renovated wing of MIT's Computational Sciences building. Unlike traditional academic spaces with their harsh lighting and echoing hallways, the center had been designed with sensory considerations. As a priority, lighting could be adjusted in each room. Acoustic panels dampened overwhelming sounds. Private workspaces existed alongside collaborative areas. Most importantly, the center operated with a fundamental principle: adapt the environment to the mind, not the mind to the environment. Michael stood in the doorway of the main research hall, observing the scene before him with quiet satisfaction. A young woman wearing noise-canceling headphones worked at a whiteboard covered in complex protein-folding algorithms. Nearby, a man with ADHD paced energetically while dictating quantum field equations into a specialized recording system. In the corner, 2 researchers, one with dyslexia, one on the autism spectrum, collaborated using a visual programming interface developed specifically to accommodate their cognitive styles. Hard to believe this all started with security footage of you at a whiteboard, said a familiar voice. Michael turned to find Nathan Reynolds beside him, the professor's formerly dark hair now liberally streaked with gray. Their relationship had evolved from the initial awkwardness of janitor and professor to something neither had anticipated: collaborators, advocates, and in their own unusual way, friends. 27 people now, Michael said, referring to the researchers currently working at the center, from 7 countries, 8 neurotypes. Nathan nodded. And a waiting list of applicants that grows every semester. The success metrics have silenced even the most skeptical administrators. The center's record spoke for itself. In 5 years, research teams composed primarily of neurodivergent scientists had published groundbreaking papers in quantum computing, molecular biology, and advanced materials science. What had begun as an experimental accommodation for one unusual mathematician had revealed an untapped reservoir of scientific talent, minds that processed information differently, often seeing patterns and solutions invisible to neurotypical researchers. The Washington delegation arrives at 2, Nathan reminded. Are you still comfortable speaking with them? Michael nodded. After years of carefully structured exposure, he had developed strategies for managing his sensory processing difficulties. In professional settings, though he still preferred the quieter, more predictable environments of his private research space. I'll speak about the math, he confirmed. Emma will explain the program structure. Emma Chen, once a protective older sister, was now the administrative director of the center, having transformed her lifetime of advocating for Michael into a professional role supporting dozens of neurodivergent scientists. Her unique understanding of both the academic world and the needs of those with different cognitive styles had proven invaluable as the center grew. The Department of Education representatives seemed particularly interested in how we might adapt these approaches for younger students, Nathan commented as they walked toward the conference area. Your work might change how we identify and nurture mathematical talent in children who don't fit conventional educational models. Michael processed this, his expression thoughtful. Many invisible minds, he said after a moment, in classrooms. Where they're too loud, too quiet, too different, the numbers find them anyway. Nathan had long since learned to appreciate Michael's concise insights. What might once have seemed like overly simplified statements, now registered as profound observations, distilled to their essence. Michael saw both mathematics and human systems with unusual clarity, unencumbered by social conventions that often obscured the obvious. Dr. Reynolds, Mr. Chen, called a young assistant hurrying down the hallway. The quantum stability simulation results just came in from the CERN collaboration. Dr. Williams asked me to inform you immediately. Nathan thanked her, turning to Michael with raised eyebrows. Shall we take a look before the Washington meeting? Michael nodded, already moving toward the computational lab where Sarah Williams would be analyzing the data. The quantum stability framework, originally born from Michael's intuitive solution on Nathan's whiteboard 5 years ago, had evolved into a major international research initiative with teams at CERN, Stanford, and Tokyo's National Institute of Informatics, all building upon the foundation of Michael's work. In the lab, Sarah looked up from her screen with barely contained excitement. It worked, she announced as they entered. All 7 test scenarios stabilized using the modified Chen framework. CERN is calling it a complete validation of your theoretical model. Michael moved to the large display screen, studying the simulation results with intense focus. The data represented the largest scale test yet of his approach to quantum bit stability, a critical hurdle in the development of practical quantum computing. Where traditional approaches had struggled to maintain quantum states long enough. For complex computations, Michael's framework embraced the inherent instability, creating adaptive systems that could function despite quantum decoherence. The blue pathways are holding, he observed, pointing to a particular data visualization, just like the music said they would. Sarah and Nathan exchanged glances, still occasionally surprised by Michael's intuitive descriptions despite years of collaboration. His unique cognitive framework, perceiving mathematical relationships as colors, textures, and musical patterns, had proved not just valid, but revolutionary. This essentially confirms that quantum computers based on your framework could maintain stable operations at room temperature, Sarah explained, though she knew Michael already understood the implications. The practical applications are everything, Nathan finished. Pharmaceutical development, climate modeling, materials science, encryption. He shook his head in wonder. And to think, 5 years ago this insight was considered too unconventional to pursue through traditional research channels. Michael continued studying the data, his body rocking gently in what Nathan and Sarah now recognized as his processing rhythm rather than a sign of distress. "The numbers are happy," he said finally, a small smile touching his lips. For Michael, this wasn't merely a professional validation. It was confirmation of what he had always known, that his way of seeing mathematics, so different from conventional approaches that it had once excluded him from academia entirely, was not a deficit, but a different kind of insight, one that could perceive patterns invisible to others. "We should incorporate these results into the presentation for the Washington delegation," Sarah suggested. "Real-world validation adds considerable weight to our arguments for expanded neurodiversity initiatives in STEM education." Michael nodded agreement, already mentally preparing for the afternoon's meeting. 5 years of careful practice had made such interactions manageable, though they still required significant energy. The difference now was that the accommodations weren't seen as special treatment, but as sensible adaptations, like eyeglasses for someone with vision impairment, that allowed valuable minds to contribute their unique perspectives. "I need 15 minutes of quiet before the meeting," he said as they left the lab. Neither Nathan nor Sarah questioned this. The center operated on a fundamental respect for each researcher's needs, recognizing that cognitive differences require different environmental supports. As Michael headed toward his personal workspace, a small, calm room with adjustable lighting and minimal sensory distractions, he passed the wall that had become known informally as the Invisible Minds Gallery. Here hung framed photographs and stories of historically significant scientists, mathematicians, artists, and innovators who had displayed characteristics of autism, ADHD, dyslexia, and other neurological differences, often undiagnosed in their time. Einstein, Tesla, Alan Turing, Emily Dickinson, Temple Grandin. Recently added to this wall was a simple frame containing the security camera image that had started everything. A grainy black and white photo of Michael at Nathan's whiteboard 5 years ago, marker in hand, capturing the moment when an invisible mind became visible. The Washington delegation arrived precisely at 2 o'clock. Representatives from the Department of Education, the National Science Foundation, and 2 senators from the Congressional Science Committee. Emma met them in the center's reception area, which had been designed to showcase both the scientific achievements and the innovative environmental adaptations that made them possible. "Welcome to the Neurodiversity and Scientific Excellence Center," she greeted them warmly. "I'm Emma Chen, Administrative Director. We're delighted you could see our work firsthand." Senator Harriet Wilson, chair of the Congressional Science Committee, stepped forward to shake Emma's hand. "The preliminary data your center has provided is quite remarkable," she said, "particularly the comparative research output metrics for neurodivergent research teams." Emma smiled, having learned to translate between the languages of bureaucracy, academia, and her brother's world. "We believe the results speak for themselves, but more important than the metrics are the breakthroughs that might never have happened if these minds had remained excluded from scientific discourse." She led the delegation on a carefully planned tour, explaining the environmental modifications and support structures that enabled researchers with various neurological differences to thrive. Many of the visitors appeared surprised by the simplicity of some accommodations: adjustable lighting, sound dampening materials, flexible work schedules, communication alternatives, in contrast with their significant impact on research productivity. Many of these adaptations cost less than standard office furniture, Emma explained, as they observed a young physicist with sensory processing sensitivity working in a modified space. The return on investment has been extraordinary, both in human potential and scientific advancement. The delegation asked thoughtful questions about implementation costs, scalability, and educational applications as Emma guided them toward the conference room where Nathan, Sarah, and Michael waited. She had deliberately structured the tour to prepare the visitors for meeting Michael, knowing that understanding the center's philosophy would provide important context. In the conference room, Michael sat at Nathan's side, a tablet computer before him, displaying the talking points they had prepared together. Though he still preferred writing to speaking in most professional contexts, years of practice had made these presentations manageable with proper preparation. Senator Wilson, distinguished representatives, Nathan greeted them, standing as they entered. Thank you for your interest in our work. I'd like to introduce Michael Chen, our chief theoretical researcher and the mathematical mind behind the quantum stability framework. Michael stood briefly, nodding to the visitors before resuming his seat. Emma took her place beside him, a familiar presence that helped anchor him in unfamiliar social situations. Mr. Chen, your work has garnered significant attention in the scientific community, began Senator Wilson. Could you explain in layman's terms the breakthrough your approach represents? Michael glanced at Emma, who nodded encouragement. He had practiced this explanation many times, refining it to be accessible without sacrificing accuracy. Traditional quantum computing tries to prevent instability, he began, his voice soft but clear, like trying to balance spinning plates on poles. My approach accepts that quantum states are naturally unstable, like water flowing downhill. Instead of fighting the flow, we create channels for it, using the movement itself to power the computation. The senator nodded, clearly impressed by the clarity of the explanation. And this approach was not being explored through conventional research channels. No, Nathan interjected. It was considered too counterintuitive, too far outside established quantum theory, which highlights the central purpose of our center, to create space for cognitive approaches that don't follow conventional academic pathways. Mr. Chen, asked Dr. Eleanor Simmons from the Department of Education, how might your experience inform educational approaches for neurodivergent students with mathematical aptitude? Michael considered the question carefully. Most classrooms are built for one type of mind, he said. Mine didn't fit. The lights were too bright. The social rules were confusing. The teaching methods assumed everyone processed information the same way. He paused. I wasn't less capable. I was differently capable. Education should make room for different kinds of minds. Emma smoothly expanded on her brother's concise response, outlining specific recommendations for educational environments that could better identify and nurture mathematical talent in students with various cognitive styles. The delegation took notes, asking insightful follow-up questions that suggested genuine interest rather than mere political courtesy. As the presentation continued, Michael displayed increasing comfort, particularly when Nathan directed the conversation toward the recent CERN validation results. When discussing pure mathematics, his communication became more fluid, his passion evident in the precision of his explanations and the occasional emergence of his natural language of colors and textures. To describe complex concepts, The implications of Mr. Chen's framework extend far beyond theoretical mathematics, Sarah explained as they approached the end of the scheduled meeting. Practical quantum computing based on these principles could revolutionize drug discovery, materials science, encryption technology, and climate modeling. Not to mention, added Senator Wilson, that your center has demonstrated the untapped potential of neurodivergent minds in scientific research. The human resource implications alone justify further investment. As the formal presentation concluded, Dr. Simmons turned to Michael with a final question. Mr. Chen, when you were working as a janitor, solving equations in empty offices at night, did you ever imagine your work would lead to something like this? The room quieted, all attention turning to Michael. He was silent for a moment, processing the unexpectedly personal nature of the question. No, he said finally. The numbers were always there, speaking to me, but I never thought anyone would listen to them through my voice. He glanced around the room, at the center that had grown from his singular experience. Now many voices are being heard. Different voices. That's what matters most. The simple sincerity of his response seemed to affect the delegation more deeply than any of the impressive data they had reviewed. As they prepared to depart, Senator Wilson approached Michael directly. Mr. Chen, your work and this center represent exactly the kind of innovative thinking our national scientific initiatives should support. I believe you'll be hearing from us very soon regarding expanded funding opportunities. After the delegation departed, Nathan, Sarah, Michael, and Emma gathered in the center's common area to debrief. The meeting had gone exceptionally well, better than any of them had anticipated. Senator Wilson basically guaranteed increased federal support, Sarah remarked, unable to contain her excitement. Do you know what this means? We could expand the center, develop educational outreach programs, create satellite centers at other institutions. Nathan nodded, equally pleased but more measured in his response. It would certainly provide validation for what we've built here. 5 years ago, most of my colleagues considered this an interesting but limited experiment in scientific inclusion. Now it's being discussed as a potential national model. Emma watched her brother, who had moved to a nearby whiteboard and was quietly writing equations, processing the day's events in his own way. Michael? What are you thinking? He paused, marker hovering over the board. I'm thinking about the other invisible minds, he said softly. Still cleaning floors, stocking shelves, sitting silently in classrooms where no one sees what they can do. He turned to face them. We need to find them. The simple statement carried the weight of personal experience, of the decades Michael had spent with his extraordinary mathematical gifts unrecognized, his cognitive differences perceived only as deficits rather than as a different kind of ability. It was a poignant reminder of the center's fundamental purpose, not just to nurture the minds that had already found their way in, but to create pathways for those still outside. You're right, Nathan agreed, and with the kind of support, Senator, Wilson is describing, we could develop identification and outreach programs specifically designed to find those hidden minds. Starting with educational environments, Sarah added thoughtfully, reimagining how we assess mathematical aptitude, especially in students who struggle with traditional classroom settings. And workplace environments, Emma contributed. How? Many companies have maintenance staff, service workers, or administrative personnel with unrecognized abilities because no one has created the right conditions for those abilities to emerge. As the conversation continued, Michael returned to his equations, adding symbols and connecting lines in patterns meaningful primarily to him. 5 years of working at the center had taught his colleagues not to interrupt this process. His mathematical thinking was often most productive when allowed to flow in parallel to verbal discussion, the two streams of cognition eventually converging into insights neither could produce alone. After several minutes, he stepped back from the board, capping his marker with characteristic precision. The others fell silent, recognizing he was ready to speak. "We need a network," he said, gesturing to the complex web of interconnected equations he had drawn. Not just one center, many centers, connected but adaptive to local needs. Different kinds of minds need different kinds of spaces. Nathan studied the mathematical structure Michael had created. It wasn't a literal organizational chart, but a more abstract representation of interconnected systems. Exactly the kind of conceptual leap that made Michael's cognitive approach so valuable. A national network of neurodiversity research centers, Nathan translated, seeing the vision emerging from Michael's mathematical framework. Each with its own specialization, but sharing resources and methodologies. Michael nodded, adding a final symbol to the center of his diagram. With identification and outreach extending into educational and workplace environments, he confirmed, finding the invisible minds where they are, not waiting for them to find us. Emma felt a surge of emotion as she recognized what her brother was proposing, not just an expansion of their current work, but a fundamental reimagining of how society might identify and nurture diverse cognitive gifts. It was ambitious, perhaps even revolutionary, but then everything about Michael's journey had defied conventional expectations. "We'll need to develop a comprehensive proposal," Sarah said, already shifting into planning mode. "Data from our current programs, projected outcomes, implementation strategies, and partners in education, industry, and government," Nathan added. "This would require a coordinated effort across multiple sectors." As the discussion evolved into practical planning, Michael stepped away, moving toward the large windows overlooking the MIT campus. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the historic buildings, where for years he had worked invisibly, emptying trash bins and mopping floors while mathematical symphonies played in his mind, unheard by others. Now, 5 years after a security camera had captured him solving equations in an empty office. He was helping design a system that might ensure other minds like his wouldn't remain invisible. The profound nature of this transition wasn't lost on him, despite his tendency toward literal rather than metaphorical thinking. Emma joined him at the window, standing quietly beside him. After a moment, she spoke softly. "You're changing the world, Michael. Not just through your mathematics, but by helping others understand the value of minds like yours." Michael continued gazing out at the campus, processing her words. "Not just minds like mine," he corrected gently. "All the different kinds of minds, the ones that see patterns others miss, the ones that make unexpected connections, the ones that process information in ways that seem strange until they lead to breakthroughs." Emma smiled, recognizing the expansiveness of his vision. Michael had never sought recognition solely for himself or even specifically for autistic individuals. His perspective had always been more fundamental, a recognition that human cognitive diversity itself was valuable. That different ways of thinking were not deficiencies to be corrected, but variations to be understood and supported. "You know," she said, "when we were kids and I would bring you math books from the library, I always believed someone would eventually see what I saw in you, but I never imagined it would lead to all this." Michael was quiet for a long moment. Then with unusual eloquence he replied, "The equations were always beautiful to me. Now others can see that beauty too, and maybe they'll start looking for beauty in unexpected places." 6 months later, Michael stood on the podium at the National Academy of Sciences, an honor he could never have imagined during his years as an invisible janitor. Behind him sat an audience of distinguished scientists, educators, policymakers, and advocates. Before him, on a small table, rested the Presidential Medal of Science, awarded not just for his groundbreaking work in quantum mathematics, but for his role in transforming scientific inclusion for neurodivergent researchers. The ceremony had been carefully adapted to accommodate Michael's sensory sensitivities, lighting adjusted, schedule precisely maintained, speech requirements minimized. These accommodations were noted not as special concessions, but as examples of the very principles being celebrated, that environmental adaptations could unlock extraordinary potential. President Laura Stevenson approached the podium, her voice carrying clearly through the hall. The sciences have always advanced when we've expanded our understanding of who can contribute and how those contributions might be made. From the inclusion of women in scientific fields to international collaborative research, each expansion of our perspective has accelerated discovery and innovation. She turned slightly toward Michael. Today, we recognize not only an extraordinary mathematical mind whose work has transformed our understanding of quantum stability, but a pioneer who has helped us recognize that neurodiversity in scientific research is not a challenge to be overcome, but an advantage to be embraced. The president continued, citing statistical evidence of the increased research productivity, innovative outcomes, and breakthrough discoveries emerging from neurodivergent inclusive research environments. The Neurodiversity in Scientific Excellence Center was highlighted as a model that was now being replicated at 12 major research institutions across the country, with international partnerships developing in Europe, Asia, and Australia. As she prepared to present the medal, President Stevenson addressed Michael directly. Mr. Chen, your journey from night janitor to presidential medal recipient represents not just personal achievement, but a profound challenge to our assumptions about where brilliant minds might be found and how they might best contribute to human knowledge. Michael rose from his seat, approaching the podium with the carefully measured movements that helped him manage anxiety in public settings. The president placed the medal in his hands, and for a brief moment he looked down at it, a tangible symbol of a transformation that extended far beyond himself. The audience applauded, but Michael barely registered the sound. He had prepared brief remarks, practiced extensively with Emma and Nathan to manage this moment. Looking out at the sea of faces, he found his sister in the front row, her encouraging smile providing the anchor he needed. "Thank you," he began, his voice soft but clear in the respectful silence that had fallen. "This medal represents not just my work, but a change in what we see and what we value." He paused, gathering his thoughts before continuing. "For most of my life, I was invisible, not because I couldn't contribute, but because the world wasn't designed to see contributions from minds like mine. The equations were always there. The insights were always there. What changed wasn't me. It was the willingness of others to look beyond conventional expectations of what a mathematician should be, how they should communicate, how they should think." Michael's hands moved slightly as he spoke, not in the anxious flutter of past years, but in the subtle emphasis patterns he had developed as part of his communication style. Science advances when we expand who participates. Different minds see different patterns. They ask different questions. They find different solutions. We need all of these perspectives to solve the complex problems facing humanity. He looked directly at the audience now, making the kind of eye contact that once would have been impossible for him. This medal doesn't represent an end point. It represents a beginning, a recognition that there are still brilliant minds waiting to be discovered in unexpected places. Our work is to find them, to create conditions where they can thrive, and to listen to what they have to tell us. As Michael concluded his remarks, the applause was thunderous. He returned to his seat, the medal held carefully in hands that had once pushed mops and emptied trash bins at night, while his mind solved equations no one knew he could see. Later that evening, at a small private reception for family and close colleagues, Michael stood with Emma, Nathan, and Sarah in a quiet corner of the venue. The formal ceremony was over, the media interviews completed. Now it was just the four people who had begun this journey together 5 years ago, reflecting on the path that had led them here. I still remember watching that security footage. For the first time, Nathan remarked, shaking his head at the memory, seeing you at my whiteboard, solving a problem the entire department had been stuck on. I was so focused on who might be intruding in my office that I almost missed the significance of what you were doing. And now the president has presented him with the nation's highest scientific honor, Sarah added with a smile. While 12 new research centers are being established based on our model, it's remarkable how much can change in 5 years. Michael, who had been quiet since the ceremony, suddenly spoke. I want to go back to the building tonight, he said. The others looked at him in surprise. The computational sciences building? Emma asked. Why tonight? I need to see something, he replied simply, understanding that Michael's requests often had meanings that weren't immediately apparent to others. They arranged for a late-night visit to the building where everything had begun. The campus was quiet as they entered, their footsteps echoing in the empty corridors. Michael led them not to the center or to Nathan's current office, but to the janitorial closet on the ground floor, the space where he had once stored his cleaning supplies and begun each night shift. It remained largely unchanged, still used by the current maintenance staff. Michael stood in the doorway, looking at the mops, buckets, and cleaning solutions neatly arranged on shelves. I was invisible here, he said quietly, but the mathematics wasn't. It kept speaking even when no one was listening. He turned and led them up the stairs to the 3rd floor, to Nathan's old office, where the security camera had captured him solving equations 5 years before. The space was now occupied by another professor, but after hours, it stood empty and dark. Michael flipped on the lights and moved to the whiteboard that still hung on the wall. Taking a marker from the tray, he began to write. Not complex quantum equations this time, but a simple list of names. Michael Chen, he wrote at the top. Beneath it, he added Ava Rodriguez, dyslexic biologist. James Kim, ADHD physicist. Layla Washington, non-speaking mathematician. One by one, he listed the names of researchers now working at the center and its satellite locations. Researchers whose brilliant minds might have remained undiscovered, without the pathways created in the wake of Michael's own discovery. When he finished, he stepped back, capping the marker with his characteristic precision. Not invisible anymore, he said simply. Emma wiped away tears as she looked at the list. Nathan placed a hand gently on Michael's shoulder, a rare physical contact that Michael now accepted from those closest to him. This is your legacy, Michael, Nathan said softly. Not just the mathematics, but the minds you've helped bring into the light. Michael studied the list for a long moment, then turned to face them. There are still more, he said. Still cleaning floors, still sitting silent in classrooms, still being told they're broken instead of different. And we'll keep looking. For them, Emma promised, the network is growing every day. The methods for identifying neurodivergent talents are improving. The pathways are becoming clearer. Michael nodded, satisfied with this answer. His journey from invisible janitor to presidential medal recipient was extraordinary by any measure. But more extraordinary still was the systemic change it had catalyzed, a transformation in how science identified, included, and supported cognitive differences. As they prepared to leave, Michael took one final look at the whiteboard with its list of names. Then below them all, he wrote a simple equation, one that Nathan and Sarah recognized as the first quantum stability formula he had written on that same board 5 years ago, the equation that had launched everything that followed. It wasn't just mathematics. It was a reminder that breakthroughs often come from unexpected sources, that brilliance sometimes hides in plain sight, and that the most valuable scientific resource might not be advanced technology or generous funding, but the vast diversity of human minds, each perceiving the universe through a unique lens, each containing possibilities yet to be discovered. Michael capped the marker one last time, placing it precisely in the tray where it belonged. The invisible man had become visible, and in doing so, he had helped make thousands of other invisible minds visible too. "Come on," he said quietly to the others. "There's still work to do tomorrow." Together they left the building, stepping out into a night sky brilliant with stars, some obvious to the naked eye, others visible only with the right instruments, the right conditions, and the willingness to look beyond the expected places for light. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.